That particular morning, at a service station in Charleston, South Carolina, a simple stop for a cup of coffee devolved into an ordeal of harassment, degradation, and unlawful searches. Every moment was meticulously recorded, and these recordings would later expose a pattern of misconduct, initiate a federal inquiry, and result in a lawsuit seeking $5 million. This legal action ultimately led to the termination of the officers' careers and compelled the city to confront an institutional framework that had protected them for an excessive period. Before we proceed further, please indicate where you are viewing this from in the comments section and ensure you subscribe, as tomorrow's narrative is one you absolutely will not want to miss. Jordan Hayes maneuvered his dark-colored SUV into a parking spot at Sunrise Fuel in Delhi, holding a warm beverage. The morning sunlight glinted off the vehicle's surface, and his gaze swept across the lot, anticipating a brief and uneventful stop. Those tranquil expectations were shattered the instant flashing red and blue lights illuminated his rearview mirror. He had not even exited the vehicle when Officer Derek Simmons, his hand hovering near his sidearm, approached with a sharp tone and a demanding stare. Jordan's extensive training immediately took over. His movements were slow and deliberate, his hands remained in plain view, and he set his coffee aside. The way Simmons leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing at the black SUV, signaled to Jordan that this was far from a routine traffic stop. A second patrol car then pulled in behind him, and the officer inside exited briskly, a flashlight in hand, scrutinizing the SUV as if it concealed a profound secret. Jordan's mind raced, but his voice remained composed. "I'm going to retrieve my wallet now," he announced clearly, ensuring his actions were obvious and visible. "And then my vehicle's registration." Every word, every gesture was intended to de-escalate the situation, but the officers appeared uninterested in reason. As Jordan presented his driver's license and his FBI credentials, Simmons's expression hardened. The other officer began rummaging through the vehicle's interior with an efficiency that suggested this was not an infrequent occurrence, disregarding Jordan's repeated assertions about the classified documents contained within his briefcase. Patrons inside the station began to pull out their mobile phones, capturing the unfolding events. Here was a man, impeccably dressed in a tie, polished shoes, and exuding a professional demeanor, being treated like a criminal suspect. Jordan directed his attention to the second officer. "Sir, this is entirely unnecessary," he stated. "All my documentation is legitimate. I possess nothing illegal within this vehicle." The officer did not pause. His flashlight beam traced every folder and compartment as if confirming that mere compliance was insufficient. The atmosphere in the lot grew increasingly tense. The stark contrast between Jordan's composure and the officer's aggressive conduct created a palpable discord. The first officer barked an order for Jordan to exit his vehicle. He complied, keeping his hands open and visible, each motion measured, each gesture an emblem of cooperation. He observed how quickly the surrounding patrons gravitated closer, their cameras and phones held aloft, documenting the scene from various vantage points, a factor neither officer seemed to register in their singular focus on control and authority. Even as the first grip of handcuffs tightened around Jordan's wrists, he maintained his calm. He meticulously noted Simmons's every move, acutely aware that these recordings possessed the potential to reveal far more than his verbal accounts ever could. The morning had commenced like any other, but already the evidence of official misconduct was silently accumulating in the hands of bystanders and their smartphones. Every disapproving look, every authoritative command, every unnecessary pat-down was being meticulously documented, and each passing second brought Jordan closer to transforming what should have been a moment of humiliation into one of accountability. By the time a superior officer finally arrived on the scene, the narrative of that morning was already being disseminated from multiple perspectives through captured footage, astonished witnesses, and Jordan's unruffled professionalism. What appeared to be a routine stop at a gas station was rapidly evolving into a flashpoint, a spark igniting investigations, legal actions, and systemic reforms, all before the city had fully awakened. Jordan stood beside his SUV, the restraint still chafing his wrists, While the assembled gas station patrons formed a loose semicircle, some individuals whispered amongst themselves, while others held their phones steady. The morning, that should have been quiet now, felt like an approaching storm, tightening its grip around him. Officer Simmons began a slow patrol around Jordan, his boots making faint scraping sounds on the asphalt. His voice carried a tone that seemed practiced and rehearsed, the intonation of a man who had long exercised authority and consequently believed nothing could challenge it. He repeatedly posed the same inquiries to Jordan. Where are you coming from? Why are you in this vicinity? Who is the registered owner of this vehicle? With each answer Jordan provided, Simmons appeared only to grow more agitated. Jordan remained steadfast, his hands cuffed, his posture upright, his voice calm, even as a tremor of anger lay just beneath the surface. He understood the dynamics of these encounters. The objective was to exert pressure. The goal was intimidation. The intention was to provoke a reaction, thereby providing grounds for them to claim he had escalated the situation. Yet with every breath, he reminded himself that he had endured far more challenging circumstances. He would overcome this as well. The second officer, identified as O'Reilly, leaned into the SUV once more, extracting folders and flipping through their contents without any apparent right to do so. Jordan observed him closely. Each page O'Reilly handled without gloves served to compromise the chain of custody. Every search conducted without sufficient probable cause represented another infringement of his rights. Every unwarranted directive echoed in the recordings being made by the onlookers. A woman wearing a blue jacket stepped forward. Her voice trembled slightly as she addressed the officers and then Jordan. She stated that she had witnessed the entire incident and affirmed that Jordan had conducted himself appropriately. Simmons turned his attention towards her, his glare conveying a clear warning. However, she did not retreat. Instead, she raised her phone higher. Another witness, a delivery driver still clad in his work apron, spoke up next. He gestured towards Simmons and stated that he had observed Jordan parked in a normal manner, that there had been no aggressive driving, and that the officers had accosted him before he had even exited his vehicle. Simmons retorted, advising him to refrain from interfering in police matters. The driver slowly shook his head. Jordan perceived a subtle but distinct shift in the atmosphere. The witnesses were growing more confident. People were beginning to realize they were not observing a suspect, but rather a man being mistreated in broad daylight. Simmons moved closer to Jordan, their bodies now mere inches apart. His face contorted as he attempted to intimidate them with his gaze. Jordan did not flinch. He reiterated that he was an active federal agent en route to brief a task force. He reminded Simmons that his credentials were valid and readily accessible. Simmons scoffed, suggesting that anyone could produce official-looking documents. In that precise moment, Jordan understood that this encounter had become personal. It was not about suspicion or a vehicle description. It was about an officer observing a black man driving a high-end SUV in the morning and deciding that this inherently signified trouble. They manufactured the threat they sought. They created the danger they believed existed. There was no evidence, no logic, simply prejudice cloaked in the guise of authority. A third police unit arrived on the scene, eliciting another wave of murmurs from the crowd. The supervising sergeant emerged from his vehicle, adjusting his vest as he approached the group. Even before he posed any questions, 3 witnesses eagerly stepped forward to address him. They pointed towards the officers, describing the searches, Jordan's compliant behavior, and detailing everything they had observed. The sergeant raised his hands, signaling for quiet, and then directly asked Jordan to recount the events. Jordan explained everything with clear and precise detail. Not a single detail faltered, not a single sentence cracked. His voice carried the gravitas of someone who had delivered statements countless times before. As Jordan spoke, the sergeant's expression gradually transformed. His eyes shifted from Jordan to Simmons, then to O'Reilly, and finally to the cluster of recording mobile phones. Something in his posture altered. He recognized that this morning was not going to conclude in the manner his officers anticipated. The sergeant instructed Simmons to remove the handcuffs. Simmons hesitated, his jaw clenched, palpable frustration radiating from him, but he complied. The metal clasps clicked open. Jordan rubbed his wrists, not in relief, but in preparation. He already understood that this moment was merely the prelude. There would be extensive paperwork, interviews, formal complaints, statements, and a comprehensive record of every action taken by the officers from the moment their sirens activated. As Jordan regained command of his personal space and his dignity, the onlookers remained silent. The individuals present were no longer merely documenting an incident, they were witnessing the genesis of a reckoning. The instant the handcuffs were removed from Jordan's wrists, the energy at the gas station visibly shifted. Some individuals lowered their phones but continued to record. Others remained quiet, observing the officers intently, as if any misstep on their part could reignite the chaos. Jordan understood that the encounter was far from over. What transpired next would carry more significance than everything that had preceded it. The sergeant pulled Simmons aside and demanded a straightforward explanation. Simmons spoke rapidly, his words becoming increasingly jumbled. Initially, he claimed Jordan had nearly collided with their patrol car. Then, he alleged the SUV matched the description of a vehicle involved in a robbery earlier that morning. Finally, he insisted that Jordan had exhibited nervous behavior. None of these assertions aligned with what the witnesses had recorded, nor with what the cameras had captured. Each statement contradicted the one before it. Jordan stood beside the sergeant's vehicle, absorbing every fabricated detail. He did not interrupt. He did not argue. It was unnecessary. The video footage was already circulating online, presenting multiple angles, corroborating witness accounts, and establishing distinct timelines. Nothing Simmons could articulate would diminish the irrefutable visual evidence. A dispatcher's voice crackled from the sergeant's radio, confirming what Jordan had known all along. There was no robbery suspect, no matching vehicle description, no traffic infraction, and no probable cause. The sergeant looked at Simmons with a growing sense of disappointment that intensified with each passing second. Jordan retrieved his work bag from the SUV, its contents folders scattered inside, bent and dusty from the unlawful search. He gathered them silently, mentally cataloging which documents would require replacement and which digital files necessitated incident reports. He was already intimately familiar with the procedures for filing complaints, the relevant codes, and the applicable laws. However, on this occasion, the burden felt intensely personal. As he closed the SUV door, a teenager who had recorded the entire incident approached him quietly. She appeared nervous but resolute, stating that she had uploaded her video immediately because people needed to witness the reality of what had transpired. Jordan expressed his gratitude in a steady voice that belied his profound appreciation. Without the corroboration of witnesses, accounts like his were frequently distorted or suppressed. But on this particular morning, the truth had more than one protector. By midday, the footage had garnered over 1 million views. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, news outlets were hailing it as the most compelling instance of racial profiling captured on camera that year. A local journalist froze a single frame of the video, showcasing Jordan calmly explaining his federal agent status. While Simmons disregarded his statement, that specific frame proliferated widely. People reposted it with captions such as, "This is precisely why we record. This is why we voice our concerns. This is why justice must be compelled when it refuses to manifest organically." The Internal Affairs Division initiated an inquiry before dusk. Jordan was contacted within a matter of hours by federal counsel seeking every second of footage, every witness contact number, and every minute detail. He spent that evening meticulously recounting every aspect of the incident word for word in a conference room with 2 federal investigators. His account was delivered with precision, devoid of emotion, characterized by a clarity that prompted the investigators to mark their progress maps more rapidly. 3 days later, new information emerged. Simmons had accumulated 5 prior complaints related to racial profiling. 2 of these cases were still under active review. One involved a black teacher who was detained on her return journey from work due to a perceived match in description. Another concerned a college student who was subjected to a search on campus without any justifiable cause. Each of these incidents bore an eerie resemblance. the same authoritative tone, the same intimidating tactics, the same discernible pattern. What distinguished Jordan's case was its simplicity. It was publicly documented, it was undeniably evident, and for the first time, the department was unable to quietly resolve the matter behind closed doors. A week into the investigation, Jordan met with the police chief. In a formal setting, the chief conveyed his regret, but this apology came too late. The damage had already been inflicted. Jordan had been handcuffed in the presence of strangers, his vehicle subjected to an invasive search, his dignity affronted, and his rights disregarded. Regardless of the apology, the repercussions were inevitable. The department suspended Simmons and O'Reilly without pay pending the outcome of the investigation. Public pressure mounted relentlessly. Community leaders demanded explanations. Civil rights attorneys offered their support. Activists organized demonstrations outside the police precinct, advocating for accountability. Jordan subsequently filed a civil lawsuit seeking $5 million. This action was not motivated by revenge or financial gain, but by the necessity of establishing a clear boundary, a demarcation that declared enough is enough, and emphatically stated racism exhibited by law enforcement carries a significant cost when brought to light in the public sphere. The evidence meticulously gathered over the subsequent month considerably bolstered his case. Witness testimonies aligned perfectly, video footage from multiple angles synchronized flawlessly. Dispatch logs starkly contradicted the officer's official reports. It presented the kind of case that legal professionals aspire to handle and that law enforcement officers dread encountering. Within the meticulously maintained confines of the investigation building, Simmons attempted to defend his actions during internal hearings. Every defense he mounted collapsed. Every excuse he offered disintegrated. Every attempt at justification only served to expose further inconsistencies. He had not apprehended a genuine threat. He had manufactured one. By the time the department publicly released its findings, the conclusion was unequivocal. Excessive force, unlawful detention, racial bias, procedural violations, and multiple other infractions. The narrative that commenced in a quiet gas station parking lot had evolved into a landmark case that sent reverberations through an entire department. The courtroom was hushed as Jordan entered, maintaining the same composed demeanor he had displayed on the morning when everything had gone awry at the gas station. Reporters occupied the available seating, and community members lined the rear wall. In a far corner, several of the witnesses from the gas station incident sat together, holding the same mobile phones they had used to record the truth that ultimately altered everything. Jordan did not acknowledge Simmons as he walked past him. It was unnecessary. Simmons sat rigidly at the defense table, his shoulders hunched, his hands clasped with excessive tension, his gaze fixed on the floor. For the first time, he experienced the pressure he had spent his career imposing on others. For the first time, he was the one being scrutinized. The judge meticulously reviewed each piece of evidence with a slow, deliberate intensity, examining every witness statement, every frame of every recording, and every discrepancy between the officer's official reports. The room felt increasingly heavy with each detail that was brought to light. Jordan observed quietly as the truth was methodically laid bare, segment by segment, much like how he had constructed federal cases for years. This time, however, he was not the investigator. He was the victim. And the profound weight of that reality remained with him throughout the entire morning. When the judge finally rendered his verdict, his tone conveyed no uncertainty, no hesitation, and no sympathy for those who had acted unjustly. He declared the officer's actions unlawful. He deemed the detention baseless. He ruled the searches unjustified. The decision struck the courtroom with a silent but immense force. For a moment, not a soul moved, not even Jordan. Then, the announced settlement amount resonated, $5 million. This figure carried a significance far exceeding its monetary value. It signified that the city acknowledged the gravity of the incident. It conveyed that this time, the events would not be conveniently overlooked. Simmons slumped back in his chair. The humiliation he had intended for Jordan had ironically rebounded upon him. He stared ahead as the judge continued to delineate the consequences: mandatory termination, a comprehensive review of his past complaints, and a permanent mark on his record. O'Reilly also faced disciplinary measures, but Simmons bore the brunt of the repercussions. The pattern he had established had finally caught up with him. Outside the courthouse, a surge of reaction erupted the moment Jordan stepped onto the courthouse steps. Microphones were extended toward him from every direction. Questions rained down, cameras flashed, and supporters applauded. However, Jordan gently raised his hand and the surrounding clamor subsided almost instantly. He began by expressing his gratitude to the witnesses, the teenager, the delivery driver, the woman in the blue jacket. He stated that their courage had protected him that morning more than anyone realized, and that their voices and recorded evidence formed the bedrock of this triumph. He then addressed a broader concern. He noted that mornings like that were not an infrequent occurrence, and that what had happened to him had befallen many individuals who never received justice, many who were not believed, and many whose stories never progressed beyond a police report. He emphasized that this case was not solely about him. It was about compelling officers to pause and consider their actions before allowing bias to dictate their conduct. It was about instilling hope in others that accountability was achievable. He concluded by announcing his intention to donate a substantial portion of the settlement to youth programs, legal advocacy workshops, and mentorship initiatives throughout the city. This was not an act of seeking generosity or appearing noble, but rather a genuine desire to ensure that the next generation would grow up understanding their rights, recognizing their inherent worth, and knowing they possessed inherent power. 12 weeks later, Jordan revisited the same service station where it all began. He parked in the identical spot. The morning sun illuminated the pavement in precisely the same manner. Several employees immediately recognized him and came out to greet him. They extended their hands in greeting and expressed their thanks for his courageous stand. They remarked that the case had noticeably altered the behavior of law enforcement officers in the vicinity. People felt a greater sense of security and recognition. Jordan surveyed the lot, absorbing the significance of the moment. Any lingering anger or bitterness had dissipated, replaced by a quiet contentment that justice had been administered in the light of day, not concealed in darkness. As he stood there, a young child walked by with his father. The child tugged his father's sleeve and inquired if he was the individual depicted in the videos. Jordan nodded with a smile. The child then expressed his desire to emulate his bravery when he grew up. Jordan knelt beside him and explained that true bravery wasn't about confrontation, but about understanding when to remain calm, when to speak out, and when to stand firm. The child's father offered his thanks as they departed. Jordan watched them go, feeling the weight of the past lift from his shoulders, not erased, but significantly lighter, because the truth had ultimately spoken more powerfully than the badge that had attempted to silence him. And for the first time since that morning, he felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. If you believe justice can prevail when people unite, share your thoughts below and ensure you subscribe. This is a story you won't want to miss.